Handlungen haben Konsequenzen. Besonders in der Politik. Actions have consequences, especially in politics. So many people would have seen my videos recently and probably would have thought that this is the first time that I am talking about the issues I have spoken about in terms of Grenada's response in the spat between the US and Venezuela. But that is not the case. I have spoken several times before about this situation, and I have tried to warn for months about the consequences of wrong decisions about that particular situation. Even 7 months ago, I was on Ride Along talking about it. And as recent as 4 months ago, again, I was on Ride Along talking about the same issues. So I was trying to do, in some respects, what would be considered my civic duty, especially where civic society in Grenada has all but disappeared. Miraculously, as soon as the NDC came in, civic society that were so vocal during the Keith Mitchell's administration and prior became dormant during this NDC administration. But I understand. You see, you have to understand the political affiliations and infiltration of institutions in Grenada. As we have already acknowledged, the media is hijacked by radical leftists. We also know that NDC is hijacked by radical leftists. And that is why their policy decisions are influenced straight out of the pages of radical leftist playbook. But also, you have to understand that it's not just NDC and the media. The unions in Grenada for decades have been hijacked by radical leftists. And it's okay, some may say, oh, well, unions are generally, left and leftist. But there are unions that can perform their duties in a fair and effective way for their workers without being radical leftists. They don't have to be radical leftists to represent the interests of workers. But traditionally, the unions for decades have been hijacked by radical leftists. So those union reps in the past, and those recently, and those currently, are generally radical leftists. And that is why you would have seen in the last administration, prior to the NDC coming in, you would have seen that the union voices were extremely vocal, because that was part of the political ploy to sabotage the previous administration. They had a political goal, and that's the reason why they were so vocal. Any little issue, they were willing and ready to take industrial action. So none of that was a coincidence. Then civic so-called society was also hijacked by radical leftists. And again, that is why you saw they were so vocal in the previous administration, because they were part of the political ploy to try to sabotage the previous administration. But now you see that all those civic voices have gone dormant or silent. Now that is not a coincidence. They were all in it. They were all part of the radical leftist petty bourgeois gang that rules Grenada and in some respects ruins Grenada. So that is what deluded the current administration into believing that they had so much political backing from the radical leftist institutions the unions, the civic society, and of course, the advisors and handlers in the NDC administration itself and their supporters across the globe. So it's no mystery that they were emboldened to be antagonistic in some respects to the US on the Venezuela-US issue. That is why they miscalculated and failed to do what was in the best interest of Grenada. And you would see me talking about in some of this video from Right Along Live, where I specifically said that every nation should do what is in its best interest. As we can see even now, post the capture of Maduro, Venezuela is doing what is in its best interest for the survival of its people. They are not all about bravado now. They are ensuring that they use diplomacy and tact in dealing with the United States. Because there was so much projection of military power and operational execution of military power that, hey, they realize it doesn't make sense to try to solve the issues and the spat between the US and Venezuela militarily. It is counterproductive. It is not in their best interest. It will only lead to death and destruction. So wisely so. So they have decided, let us try to resolve this through diplomacy, because now the bargaining chips are not in their favor. So the United States can drive a hard bargain. And just maybe, probably, if it hadn't come to this situation earlier, before all of this happened, they probably could have had a better bargaining position. But now the chips are stacked against them. And there is still that big stick of military power hanging over their heads. In some respects, the same thing happened to many of the other smaller Caribbean islands. I believe, and probably in the future it will be revealed, that the United States, before all of this happened, decided to test the political allegiance of these small states. Because it wasn't just Grenada that was tested. St. Vincent was tested. St. Lucia was tested. Dominica was tested. Antigua was tested to see where their political allegiance lies. Because of course, the United States knew what their big plan was for Venezuela. So they must have said, okay, well, let's see where these smaller states, let's see where their allegiance lie. And then after we achieve our goals in Venezuela, then of course we'll know how to deal with them. Depending on how they dealt with us when we came to them for some sort of help. So say what they want to say, but I strongly believe that the requests made by the United States to Grenada about the whole radar implementation on the island was probably a political test to see where the loyalty and allegiance of Grenada lies. Because if you look at the efficiency in which that operation against Venezuela was executed, there is no way that that one radar system that was ultimately implemented in Trinidad and Tobago was responsible in some massive way for the operational execution of that operation to capture Maduro. I believe that the impact of that radar that was placed in Trinidad and Tobago did not significantly contribute to what happened in Venezuela. But I believe what it did, it made very clear Trinidad's position And it made clear where Trinidad's allegiance lies. So all that radar placement in Trinidad was part of the ruse, part of the deception that the United States was planning some sort of ground operation in Venezuela. Because as we should know, all war is waged by deception. So while Venezuela might have been expecting some sort of massive ground invasion, the United States had other plans of a surgical operation. For the things that were done to pull off that operation, the neutralization of the much talked about S-300 anti-aircraft system, the neutralizing of that radar system that made that anti-aircraft system blind, it tells you that the military hardware that had to go into doing all of this was way above what a military radar in Trinidad could have done. But the United States, with its forethought, got all of these little islands to play their hand. So there is less obligation from the United States to these nations after they have achieved what they wanted to achieve in Venezuela. And now they can drive a hard bargain. Because they could say, you didn't help us to achieve our goals. So why should we be lenient with you right now? We don't need you as much as we did initially. And you will see in this video that I'm about to show you when I was on Ride Along, that I warned when there was visa restrictions on one of the ministers, I warned that that was possibly a warning shot. And incremental consequences could have followed, depending on how Grenada handled the situation. And you would see sometimes the host was really not in agreement with me, and obviously the NDC hitter who was on the show as a guest didn't believe or couldn't see any of the things that I was saying. And we know how he feels, and we know how entwined he is with the current administration, so I didn't expect him to see. But say what you want to say about Junior, and everybody would say that the program is followed by many pro-NDC people, and you'll see in the comments, I don't look at comments too much, but some people tell me that they're generally a bit of vitriolic comments if you're not in line with what they believe. But say what you want to say about Junior, he has the guts to invite people on the show who have differing opinions to his followers, to some of his followers. And some of them would say, oh, don't bring this guy on this show. Why are you bringing this guy on this show? But I am sure for the many who said a bunch of crap and nonsense, I am sure now they see exactly what I was talking about. But I understand what affects the collective psychology of Grenadians. It goes back to what I just spoke about. The unions who pretends to represent the interests of the working man and the proletariat, they're the ones who influence these people. The media, the radical leftist media in Grenada influence these people. And of course, what would have been civic society, which has gone dormant, influence these people. And without a doubt, the current administration, because it thought it had the backing of all these radical leftist institutions in Grenada and the shadowy figures behind the scene, thought they could have spoken all that bravado and project all that nonsense that they were talking without consequences. You see, these radical leftists, older radical leftists, got a gosmic, they got a hard-on when they saw that NDC attained the powers of government. So they saw it as an opportunity for themselves to live some sort of dream again. But what they had failed to realize, that the world had dramatically changed since the early 80s. And that they were leading Grenada and the current administration down a very dangerous and deadly path. And now when they realize that politically, intellectually, they have failed, guess what? They are going to take Bush. They are going to leave this current administration in the mess for them to figure it out themselves. Because they know now the squeeze and the pressure that would be applied, they don't want to be part of it. So I had warned them about the warning shot. And obviously, nothing was done to try to make the situation better. And I said to them that there could be incremental measures that could affect Grenadians collectively. And so it was said, and so it was done. I even advised publicly that do not look at what St. Vincent is doing. Do not look what Rav Gonzalez is doing. Do not look at what Mia Motley is doing. And do not look at what other nations are doing. Because what they say publicly and what they do behind the scene and say behind the scene may be entirely different. Because these people have some level of political experience. And they themselves would do what is in the best interest of their state. You can see with this operation in Venezuela, for all the socialist Marxist brotherhood that there is in the world, guess what? No one again could have come to the assistance of Venezuela. Because the political climate does not allow it. The military climate does not allow it. It is no mystery that the United States would have moved 14% of its naval resources to the Caribbean. And what do you think that was about? That was a deterrent and a message to anyone who was thinking of getting involved in what was going on there to say, look, you better back off. Then, of course, there are nations whose hands are tied in other places. There are nations who are not looking for an open confrontation with the United States because they both know what that means. But guess what? These little youngins thought that they are some political genius. They thought that they are some master global negotiators. That they can just talk and say whatever they want and there would have been no consequences. I don't know who taught them that. I don't know what high school they went to. Because if they went to high school where they was taught cause and consequences, they would not have recklessly behaved the way they did. So let's take a look at that video when I went months ago on Ride Along talking about the possibility of the consequences for the actions, the reckless actions that the administration was taking. Take a look at this. I like the other things that I'm hearing. And that's for the visa.
What specifically about the visa thing?
Yeah, I'm going back to the visa now. Yeah. So as for the visa restrictions, it is quite obvious that certain things were said in the public domain. And people may have personal feelings about the issue. I have feelings about the issue. You have feelings about the issue. Many have feelings about the issue. But as a statesman, as a minister, if you go and you say something in parliament or you say something in the public domain, what people assume is that what you're saying, it may be a personal opinion, but what they assume is that what you're saying is actually a government position. And that's a problem. Because the first and foremost job of a minister is to preserve the state. Okay? So you have to be extremely careful about what you say in the public domain. Because many people are looking. And sometimes very important people are looking, if you understand what I'm saying. Okay? So that was a problem. As to how you go forward, of course, first thing, as you said, you have to use your diplomatic channels and have a conversation. As the people who are planning to do those restrictions, what is the problem? What are we doing wrong? How can we fix this? How can we come to a negotiated settlement on this? As I said, not only 30% of your import-export is done with the United States, but you have St. George's University, which you always are so proud of and always talks about, that contributes over 100 million USD to the economy annually. Okay? So again,
yes,
and most of the people, as you and I would know, that goes to the St. George's University, where are they coming from? Where are they coming from?
Yeah, most of them are source major source market is the United States.
Exactly. So almost another reason why you would not want to do anything that would be perceived as anti the interests of the United States. You have to understand, we could be sentimental and, about these things, but the problem is that there's a global political world, and it's much clearer right now. Everybody sees everything. Back in the days, you didn't have all that social media, you didn't have all that satellites, you didn't have all that information connectivity. So now every single thing you do, people see. And you yourself have a lot of experience with the United States, and you understand that once you're put into a database, every time something happens subsequently, you're flagged. And I see this as a warning shot. This was a warning shot to the administration and say, hey, look, come to me, let's have a conversation. And we can be sentimental and say, and we can play with tough, and we big and we bad, but that does not work practically to our benefit. We tried the same thing in 1783, and the consequences were horrible.
Right.
It led to the death and destruction of Grenadian people en masse. And it led
the position that was articulated was the same by Grenada, was the same position that was articulated by Barbados Prime Minister. It was same by St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonzalez. It was even the position when Marco Rubio, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, went to Jamaica. And I don't know if it's a game.
It is a game
that has been played.
It is a game.
Right? But when Marco Rubio went to Jamaica, the same position that the Prime Minister of Jamaica said, the same thing that he said to Marco Rubio, and Marco Rubio said, well, fine, great, well, we understand now. That's the position. And it's probably not what Jamaica is doing, but probably what somebody else is doing, so we got to take a bigger look at it. He played such a political game with them, right? And it's the same exact thing that Grenada is doing, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. We have people, we have medical practitioners that come in from Cuba. They practice here in Grenada. They do the same thing in Jamaica. They do the same thing in St. Vincent. They do the same thing in Barbados. There's nothing different. So what could Grenada do differently to prevent themselves? What should they just say? You know what? Okay, the Great America said this. You know what? Forget about Cuba. Cuba, forget about you. I want no dealings with you because of X, Y, and Z and send back all the medical practitioners back to Cuba, what position then would Grenada be in that situation?
Well, that's not the approach. That would not be the approach. You have to understand, and again, we have to understand global politics. Now you have to understand that in Jamaica is run by a center-right party. NDC, as you probably know, is considered a center-left party. Now people who are looking along are believing that NDC is drifting further and further to the left and is becoming more leftist radicalized. Now, you know the American administration. How do you think they would perceive the Grenada's administration? How do you think they would perceive it? Another thing is, do we know what Mr. Hollis and his administration did behind the scenes? Do we know what Ms. Mia Motley did behind the scenes? Do we know what Ralph Gonzalez did behind the scenes? Now, these three administrations have a wealth of political experience. And I can bet my bottom dollar that these people behind the scenes probably would have said something publicly, but behind the scenes would have sang an entirely different tune. And as I said, because of the experience, if you don't want to learn from your personal experience, like, if you have a personal experience, you got hurt when you did something, guess what? You would tread cautiously in the future. It's the same thing. Grenada has a wealth of experience of being in that situation before. Do you agree?
Well, Grenada
From
has
1983, do you agree that we have a wealth of experience of being caught up in what possibly could be a Cold War? Do you believe that there's a resurgence to some extent currently of a Cold War? Given that, one should, as an administration, one should tread extremely cautiously. And again, given the fact that we've had so much experience that a hawkish president was willing to actually militarily send 10,000 troops and invaded Grenada. Did they ever believe that would have happened? And again, as I said, currently, people are suggesting that this administration could be a little more hawkish. We have to understand that states do what is always in their best interest. Okay? Cuba was an ally in 1783. The United States invaded Grenada. I would say a country that was ill-equipped, very much ill-equipped, to deal with a superpower. Did Cuba rush and say, okay, well, let me send a couple MiGs to help out Grenada? Did they do that? No, they didn't. But the point I'm making is that states always do what is in their best interest. No matter, this is not like a friend. Even friends do the same goddamn thing, right? Friends and people you interact with may ultimately, if it comes down to the wire, they will do what is in their best interest. So states and the people who represent those states need to do what is in the best interest of the state that they represent. As I said, I just gave you an example. You would think that Cuba being such a great ally of Grenada from 79 to 83, and here it is, your allies invaded. And of course, you didn't do anything, right? Because you couldn't probably, or it was not politically wise to do it, or it was not strategic to do it. So you get the point I'm making.
Can jump in here. Is Grenada, or should Grenada move to abandon a relationship with Cuba?
Not saying that, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying to abandon.
Okay.
I'm saying, I just said to have a conversation, to ask the party that is concerned, how can we amicably resolve this situation? What can we do to resolve this situation in the interest of the both parties. You have to have a conversation, see what is proposed, and then you can act.
Kev, jump in here, because I, again, hear it. Yeah, go ahead, Kev.
Junior, my question is, does Perry know whether or not the government of Grenada had a conversation behind the scenes with the United States of America, or initiated any through the diplomatic channels? Because, I mean, he highlighted Ralph Gonzalez, he highlighted Mia Motley, Andrew Holness, and he doubted the possibility of the government of Grenada doing a similar thing behind the scenes. It came across as though he's that negative when it comes to Grenada and the government of Grenada. And
That's not true. That's not true.
Because he isolated Grenada, but that's just one. But, you know, I listened to Perry a while ago, and he made me think that there is some restriction imposed on Grenada already, and that there is a list of Grenadians whose visa has been revoked or restricted or some sanction or something. I mean, he spoke there frightening, scaring the hell.
I want you to be scared. I want you to be scared. That was deliberate. Because as Junior would understand, and people in the annals of international politics will understand, that this is a warning shot. Again, you are dealing with a hawkish president. By some measure, people may say. So I'm saying to you, their measures may be incremental. This may be a first step. And then there could be consequences subsequently for Grenadians collectively.
Right. So, Junior, I am asking the question: what has the government of Grenada done wrong in all of this yap from my good colleague Perry? Because he makes this thing looks like Grenada has done something wrong, or the NDC administration has done something wrong. What has they done differently from the NNP? Because
that's what we can only speculate about.